Welcome to Getting Better with Dr. Adam. Dr. Adam Silberstein is a clinical psychologist who has been working in the field since 1993. With a broad range of clinical experience, including state psychiatric hospitals, adolescent residential treatment with a trauma focus, the Department of Corrections, and in the addiction treatment arena. Adam is currently in private practice and serves as a clinical consultant and supervisor for a number of treatment centers. This podcast is for general information and entertainment purposes only. This should not be considered treatment advice, nor is it a substitute for an individual treatment plan. If you have questions or concerns about your individual situation, it is strongly recommended you consult a licensed professional to talk about things that are specific to you. If there is an emergency, it is strongly recommended you seek treatment at your nearest emergency room.
As the father of an aspiring musician, working musician, I should say, I just had the opportunity to meet with Zach Borer. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist. He walked us through his story in the music industry, the exciting parts of it, the challenging parts of it, the painful parts of it, the vulnerability, and the high stress that accompanies the day in the life of the artist. And took us through his journey into becoming a therapist who his mission is to help other musicians and to help the community to advocate on their behalf and offer them the needed services in mental health to support their painful struggle. What he really brought to the table here is this is really hard. It's not simple just writing music. It's not like a fun arts and crafts project that you do in camp. It's a painful journey of exposure and criticism and vulnerability and pressure that needs discussion. As we know, so many people in this industry have had tragic deaths and struggle with various mental health issues. Zach has created a nonprofit organization called backline.care. And the mission is to be the first line in case management. That just means the first line access to people who reach out for help and helping musicians to find the support they need. Today, I have the distinguished privilege of having Zach Borer. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist here in Los Angeles. Nice to have you here. And I'm going to give a little preamble as I do. The spirit of what we're trying to do with this podcast is really help people get better. Both people who work in the field and for the general public. What does it mean to have a struggle? And who are the people who are helping people get better? And what does getting better look like? And we've done some really interesting topics that speak to me and on many levels. But this particular topic today is about the challenges of the working musician. And I want to give a little bit of qualification in regard to that. I am a clinical psychologist, and my wife is a medical doctor. And both we have 4 children, and 2 of our children are artsy. We didn't actually 3. That's, but 2, let me qualify that. 2 children who are out of the house, sort of, are both very artsy. One is a graphic designer artist, and the other one happens to be a musician. And it's puzzling to me, as I've shared with you, it's puzzling to me, especially, I get the graphic design piece of things because you can get hired by a company, and then you can have your own company, and you have people come in, they want something, they pay you, and so forth. I come from a world where education is extremely important, and finishing college is a no-brainer, right? It's just a guarantee, and the options that you have are you could be a lawyer, you could be an accountant, and you could be a doctor for sure. That's really top of the line. And that's the gold standard is I'm a doctor. And some people can be successful businessmen. That's cool too. So when I was growing up, I didn't know that there was even such thing as the option of a musician. And I'll tell the story uh, of my story. So I have this kid, and I didn't know any. I just knew he liked to listen to music. Who doesn't? And one holiday season for Hanukkah, I think he was in ninth grade. He asked for, hey, can I have a recordings session? I don't even know what he's talking about. Maybe he's a little musical. And I happened to be trained by an individual who was married. The person passed away since. He was the sound engineer for a band called Supertramp in the 70s. So he was involved in studio work, and I called in a favor, and I let my kid go to this recording session. And I apparently had written some songs in ninth grade. And so I dropped him off, and I picked him up, and this man, the sound engineer, his name was Russell Pope. He said to me something that sort of still rings in my head as a parent. He said, I'll quote him, he's a really proper British guy. He said, you should lose any lurking notion that your child is going to be a doctor, lawyer, or accountant. Your child is a musician, and he's very talented. You won't be able to stop this train. And he said, but don't get excited. That may not even buy you a cup of coffee and a token on the subway. So I heard that really clearly, and I've watched everything he said was true. And the good news was, as a parent, I got to support that. And because I saw the momentum, and I got to discover what he meant. What is it like to have this thing that you have to do, the creative process? And since then, he's gone to college for it, and he's a working musician. But this is not, apply to college, get in, apply to medical school, get in, do your residency, hang up, open an office. So that is what I have a lot of experience personally in terms of watching this unfold. And here I'm talking to somebody who's made a career in this helping profession of how do I work with musicians. So welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. That was a lot.
What a great story.
Yes. And I know we've spoken before in the past, guidance and mentorship. Why don't you begin by telling us about your version of this story, because you are both therapist and musician.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. My background is very similar to what you were just describing. I come from a family where being a professional creative was not something that is ordinary. All of my friends growing up are now lawyers, accountants, doctors, finance people. And so I was sort of like your son, bitten by the creative bug very early on. I was 5 or 6 maybe, and can still recall that memory in my brain. So when I was in high school, I played music just for fun. And then as the years went on and I went to college, again, it wasn't, are you going to college? It was, where are you going to college? And then at around 20 years old, I met some individuals who sort of catapulted my music career. Post-college, moved to DC for a year, and then made my way up to New York City, where I spent the next 10 years on the grind as a quote-unquote professional musician. And I qualify quote-unquote because while I was making money, I still had to have side jobs. So I spent 10 years really living the sort of cliche artist lifestyle of playing, performing, writing, being in bands, touring, and then moonlighting at night as a bartender until 3, 4 in the morning for years and years and years and years. So that was what I did for 10 years. And as I sort of got a little older, made some strides in my career, I sort of had to take a hard look at where I was, where I wanted to go, and the type of life that I wanted. And continuing on that grind was not something that was appealing or sustainable for the life that I wanted to live.
So the grind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the grind, I think people have this notion, I think that the general public would say, I've heard of struggling artists. They know what that is, kind of. I think they also have this idea that, someone makes it or doesn't make it,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's part of the conception.
Mm-hmm.
And once you make it, it's easy,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's so, few and far between. You're very lucky you've made it. And that's the extent. But when you say the grind, and I sort of watch the grind in my own life,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I can use the word struggling artist, but I don't think it comes to life. I don't think it comes to life. And I just happen to be a clinical psychologist. Just because I'm a clinical psychologist doesn't mean I have cultural competency.
Sure.
So this is a competency that I happen to know,
Mm-hmm.
right? When you say grind, you really know what it means.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the grind?
For me, in my life, it's the constant daily desire to be something and to prove yourself and or to become quote unquote successful in an environment that you have very little control in. So being a musician is dependent upon what other people think of you and how they're going to help the success of that. So for me, the grind was waking up every day and motivating myself to create with really arbitrary deadlines, no real accountability, but still knowing that I needed to create, I needed to perform, I needed to get my band together, I needed to book gigs, I needed to travel, and living in a city that was astronomically expensive, which required me to work a job that was 30 to 35 hours a week. So the grind for me was that lifestyle, which then led to feelings of anxiety, depression, financial fear, insecurity, comparison, relationship problems. So that's sort of after doing that for so many years, I didn't want to live like that anymore. And for me in my life, I had to take a hard look at where I was, where realistically I was going to go in my creative career and what that would require. And so I was unwilling to do that at that time. And so I made a pivot. And through my own therapy and personal development coaching and my own sort of internal deep dive, I realized that the same things that were happening to me were happening to my entire community of music people. So the people in my band, my friends, my colleagues, from really the bottom up. So the person working in the restaurant all the way up to the person who had a Grammy nomination were sort of suffering from the same things. At the same time, I was introduced to an entirely different community of creatives in New York, the Broadway world, and a lot of professional actors, and I was seeing very similar psychological things happening. So I sort of intuitively saw what I would call the sort of artist archetype that I was seeing and I was living, and realized that my life would be better served helping those individuals navigate the complexities of what I had gone through than actually sort of creating myself.
So hence you became a therapist.
So hence I became a therapist.
So I want to get to the core issue that I think let's say I take you back to 19, 20 years old, all those years, and I hear the gravity of the pressure is rooted in a core belief, I have to succeed, right? So
for me, it was at least.
So I would imagine, and I'm speculating, doing this for the sake of joy exclusively when I set out on that road is hard. That's a hard core belief. Meaning the different core belief would be, I love music so much, I don't care where it goes. I just need to be doing it.
Well, there's a lot of individuals who do that.
And I would imagine they're not sitting in your office.
Typically, no.
Right?
Typically, no.
So there's this intense pressure that is the mothership belief, right? So to speak, which is, a constant performance evaluation
Right.
is, am I living up to what I set out to do?
Sure. And I think you're spot on. Not only in my own personal experience, but a lot of the individuals that I work with, there is this, I sort of talk about the heart-head connection. And when we're 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, even before, when we first get into any sort of artistic endeavor, the things that pull us towards it, whether it be dance or music or graphic design or drawing or whatever it is, it lives in your heart space. It's all because of the love of wanting to do it. And professionals, it so slowly starts to creep up, and it lives, in my opinion, lives more in the headspace. It becomes more of a career. How am I going to make money off of this? How am I going to be able to support myself? And oftentimes, where the art lived in your heart space gets neglected. And so a lot of the work that I try to do with artists is try to have them recenter themselves in the heart space and understand what it is about the creative endeavor that they love. I want to try to take them back to the place that they were when they were first getting into this, to find out what it is that they love. Because if it all operates from the headspace, I don't think it's sustainable. And it just is the way it is when you become a professional. And there's different expectations, and there's different people to satisfy, and it just becomes much more dynamic and much more complex.
So there was a time in anybody who sets out to do this, most likely, where it was born in heart, it wasn't born in head.
I believe so.
Right? And that ultimately what starts to become the virus of thought, or the occupier, is this idea that I have to crush it. I have to be able to make it. And then from there, I would venture to say that it's a setup of chronic assessment, threat assessment. I'm not going to make it. Am I going to make it? It's a threat assessment.
Sure.
So I'm not going to make it. What does it say about my creative heart? It means it's not good enough, right? What does it say? My ability is exclusively who I am. This heart part of me is contingent upon the value of the product that's received by others.
Yes.
And
especially when you become a professional.
Right. When I determine myself, when I classify myself as a working musician, even if I'm doing 30 hours a week of bartending or 35 hours a week, no matter what, at that point, it's a chronic assessment of where do I stand, because I need to be quote unquote successful. Successful can mean the success can mean I need to be, the Beatles, or I need to be, it could be or I need to be exclusively working as a musician, right? But success is idiosyncratic, but I'm constantly assessing where I am relative to that belief. I'm only okay if I am successful.
Sure.
Right?
As with a lot of professions, but I believe specifically in creative endeavors, the blur between profession and identity is much greater in the creative fields. In my opinion, you are the artist, you are the dancer, you are the musician, you are the singer, you are in this band, and removing yourself from that identity is very, very challenging. It takes a lot of introspection and a lot of work. And so what happens is, and what happened for me, is that my self-worth became contingent on the success, if you will, of what I was doing. So the value of my life was determined upon the value of where the music was getting me in a professional sense.
So the blur of who I am, my heart, my passion versus my identity, right? That's a blurry line. So one of the questions that was just posed is so what is this artist? Is that part of the artist archetype you were describing? Meaning, what is this model, this paradigm of artist, the musician? Because and is part of that paradigm a sensitive vulnerability to and confusion of identity, meaning my passion for creating, but also my sensitivity around how it's received. Is that part of the archetype?
Yes.
So what is the archetype?
So the archetype, the way that I lived it and the way that I saw it, was this pull, this gravitational pull to be a creative individual. Like you said, your son, it happened to him, and there was no taking him out of that. And so a lot of artists, myself included, feel that pull, and with it comes this whole bag of other things. So I think that anxiety, depression, comparison, reality of the artist world. The interesting thing too is musicians specifically, if you're a songwriter, we are asked to be vulnerable and to express our wares on paper and through song. And then we put it out there to be judged by everybody else. So I might think that the work that I've done is the greatest thing in the world. It is my best work. And then you bring it into your management's office or your label's office and they shit on it. And so what does that do for your self-worth? And what does that do for your expectation? What does that do for continuing to pursue these things when your art is who you are and you are then being judged upon it?
So you have these innate qualities to be sensitive and to be vulnerable and to be connected in that heart way you were describing.
I believe that artists in particular are more sensitive and are more vulnerable than most people. They look at the world in a way that is a little more dynamic and less linear. And so you and I might see the chair sitting in front of us, but a songwriter, a dancer, a chef, whoever it might be, will see a dish and we'll see a song and we'll see something in there that most people don't see. And that requires an increase in their senses, which then make them more sensitive.
And here I am sharing it vulnerably.
And here I am sharing it because it's what's important to me to share because I need to get it out. It has to get out. And then we put it on a plate, if you will, and serve it to the world. And we open it up to all of their different opinions about it.
And then I can be without the right armor, right? And without the right coping, I could be crushed.
Sure.
So I'm interested in so it's not a news flash to people listening that there's such thing as brooding, pained, drug addict, eating disordered, suicidal,
all of this
artists. It's not a new thing.
Well, it's also all of the psychological issues that quote unquote normal people will have, which are all those things you just talk about. Artists have them as well. But then there's a lifestyle on top of it that can exacerbate many of those issues.
So walk me through, since this is your mission now, is connecting to the artist in pursuit and the community of artists. What does it look like? What does it look like on the ground as far as a mental health practitioner? The life of this archetypal artist.
Sure. And we're sort of talking about the construction of the artist personality, but I think another really important part of this is what the industry and the lifestyle demand of that personality.
Got it.
Which is very challenging as well. So what I see on the ground so much is a lack of understanding and a lack of sensitivity to the people who are in this profession. One-on-one, I work with many, many different issues, including depression, anxiety, suicidality, personality disorders, all of the things that we would see normally. But then again, there's a lot of discussion about how to sustain yourself in this lifestyle, how to arm yourself to critique, how to live healthy and productively on the road. So I always say it's like a 50-headed dragon here.
So there's so many things. Yes, you have bread and butter, issues of life that so many people have, but the personality coupled with the lifestyle, which is demanding and chronically being critiqued, how do I receive and give feedback, right, without falling apart?
Mm-hmm.
How do I have lack of stability and anchoring in the sense that I'm never in one spot and I may be demanded to be, traveling in a blurry way from city to city, right? And how do I cope? And I would even say, how do I tolerate uncertainty? Because so much of it is uncertainty, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know I don't know when I'm going to I don't want to work at the bar anymore, right? Or I started to not need to work in the bar. Am I going to be able to sustain
And
this?
even at the highest level, I have to make a record in 6 months. I have no material. How am I going to generate this material? I'm on a deadline.
Uh-huh.
We've booked the studio.
Right. Help me have compassion for that person. Meaning, help me have compassion for the person. I have such compassion for the person working 2 jobs, and then they have their break and they've killed it financially, let's say, right? And I appreciate. Help me have compassion for their struggle.
But fame and fortune do not equate happiness. So we've seen that in our practice all the time, and so oftentimes the same insecurities for the person working 2 jobs in the bar to get out of the bar than it is for the artist who is now playing 1,000-seat venues, right? And then they need to go to 2,000-seat venues. And once they get to 2,000-seat venues, their management or their label or whoever it might be is saying, we got to push you to the next level. We got to do this. We got to do this. So the pressure continues to mount and to mount. Now, there are the mega celebrity and mega stars who have these issues as well. And I understand the reluctance to find compassion there.
No, I said, help me find compassion.
Sure.
And the message is, how do I, if I'm listening to this and I am struggling, right? The message is that the head-heart situation that you spoke about exists whether you are at the highest level of earning or no matter where you are in the earning spectrum.
Sure.
That idea that I'm only successful, success means this as defined outside of me and my heart.
Correct.
I'm vulnerable to this.
Correct. Because if there's a very prominent artist who puts out an album and has 10 million streams, the next album should have 15 million streams or whatever. So that understanding of self-worth through the art doesn't necessarily change.
Right. And it could be in the headspace torture. And as a matter of fact, maybe even worse.
Sure.
Right? Because the pressure is so immense. I have people in practice with that type of pressure, and you'd think the audience would think, "Wow, it must be great to be them." Poor, these are quality problems, but it actually is experienced as intense. And we know in the media, we know that people die.
Absolutely. And the other interesting thing is, if someone's creating in their bedroom and puts a song out on SoundCloud or wherever it might be, there could be a handful of people listening. There could be a handful of judgments then coming back at them. But when a high-end artist puts their music out and it's streamed 1 billion times, there's 1 billion people who have their own different opinions about the music, and then they are sort of like throwing daggers at them all the time, or can throw daggers at them all the time about judging the work that they are doing. So the responses from the public can be much, much greater, which then can cause a lot more internal struggle, anxiety, and other psychological issues.
Defeat, addiction, right?
Sure.
And death.
Sure.
And we've seen it too many times. We've seen it way too many times.
We haven't even touched upon the addiction piece of this, but that's such a prominent part of this, which is how to cope with all of the things that we're talking about, which is where the substance abuse can come in as well. So
here you are, you're working with these people. I would think that part of what you're doing is resilience. It's both connecting to heart and resilience to cope with criticism,
sure,
resilience to tolerate uncertainty. What are you trying to foster and facilitate in individuals, in the artist?
For me, the really interesting question is, like I said previously, is finding that spark that happened when they first entered the business, if you will. Helping them rediscover the love of the craft. And also dealing with the relational issues that can come about as well. So, something that we see often is relationship issues due to the touring lifestyle. So the way the business has changed significantly is touring is much greater now in an artist's career. And so it requires people to be on the road a lot longer. And so that can be a strain on many personal relationships. So I see a lot of artists who are having a hard time with their spouse or having a hard time with their kids because they have to get on the road in order to make money. So again, it's such a dynamic
Right.
and complex and and giant practice, if you will. I mean, that we could talk about each one of these issues for an hour, probably.
Absolutely. I just think of coping with change in an unpredictable industry, right? That's one topic, meaning
Sure.
everything can change. There's no formula of best practice.
Sure.
This is an unpredictable, what once was isn't, and who knows what the future holds.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's stress. Then you have the stress of how do I I don't have anchoring, right? So I hear you. I'm not anchored. I don't have, everybody wants to have a home and an office. When you move people's offices, they get freaked out. What if I move all the time? How do
you stay healthy?
How do you stay healthy? How do you create flexibility? How do you not get high all the time?
How do you not get high all the time? And how do you manage and deal with a 2-hour peak experience, oftentimes that is unlike anything else that exists in humanity? And how do you come down off of that? How do you find the other 22 hours in the day to manage until you get to that point where you feel this energy and this explosion of living in a way that nothing else can compare?
You're talking about the performing
I'm
experience?
talking about the performing experience.
So it's supercharged and energized.
Supercharged and energized. It's very interesting. I had a very, very successful drummer and his wife come see me once, and they had just played an arena gig. So, 15,000, 16,000 seats. And his wife said, "How am I going to get him to change our daughter's diaper after he comes off stage where he's a god?" And so that's part of the challenge that so many, not only artists, but the family members of artists are facing also. So it's just a small little story to highlight how difficult this can be.
So I have so many different, you're right, this could be a 1-week workshop on every single topic that we've said. So, and what we're talking about is the gravity of the issue, right? But what is the therapy specialty, so to speak, the skill set of a therapist in knowing this community and knowing the struggles and the dynamics amongst other issues that the individual has? What is the ingredients of fostering a different experience with a painful journey? What would you say are the primary ingredients that a therapeutic atmosphere could lend to help this individual?
I mean, I think just with any other therapeutic experience, creating a safe environment for people to be in is really helpful. I have found that my experience in the music industry has been very helpful for artists to open up, and they understand that I relate, much like many people in recovery want to work with other people who have gone through the process. I find there's a similar parallel process happening with me and my clients. And I do think that there's a limited number of clinicians out there who have lived this or fully understand what this experience is like. So it can be challenging for artists and their family members to find clinical help that really understands the experience.
So I'm going to throw out some judgments from my seat.
Okay.
And I'm not speaking as a psychologist. I'm speaking as a parent of someone who, by the way, in fairness to him, he's pretty grounded, and he's got his head on straight so far, right?
And working.
And aware that it's part luck, right? That there's luck and there's unluck. There's such thing as being unlucky.
Sure.
Right? That's a factor. There's such things as being lucky. There's also such thing as showing up no matter what. There's a lot of ingredients that go into it. But both in my seat as parent, in my seat as citizen of a city like Los Angeles, they look pretty cool. They've got cool tattoos. They could be attractive, artsy, trendsetters, good dressers, and so forth. And there's a certain disinhibition that one might think is happening, that they're sort of letting it out. I'm calling bullshit. So I'll tell you what I think. I think they're scared. I think they're isolated. And you could isolate even in a space of community. So who knows the truth, the vulnerable truth of, I'm scared shitless, I question my talent, and I don't know what's going to happen, and I really want you to see me as great. And I'm terrified of you not seeing me that way, and this hurts.
And what is the image that I have to then put onto the public so they see me that way?
So to the non-artist, I look at you guys and I say, wow, you're so cool. Jealousy, right? Envy, right? Like, how come I can't be that way? My suspicion in knowing it is that it's a vulnerable thing, that even in the space of creative vulnerability, where somebody's exposing themselves in a certain way, the true exposure is and ability to say to people, this is really hard and scary. It's not so simple.
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of the change in culture that's happening in the music business specifically is that more artists are recognizing all of those things that you talked about in themselves and are being more vocal about them. That they are saying, I struggle just like you do. And I could go through a laundry list of artists who are now on the record talking about those things, which is a really wonderful thing. And so what I'm seeing too is, from a public facing view, more artists are talking about their mental health issues, are talking about their insecurity, their addiction issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So I often,
but you're spot on. I mean, it's a challenging life, and part of the pressure is the need to present yourself in a way that is, I'm cool, I have tattoos, I can do this, I'm different than you are.
I have the right tattoos, I should say. So I want to say this, as far as our work as therapists, to me, there's specialty and there's tons of information, but the key ingredient for the environment of change, the environment that could help people to get better, has to provide safety and vulnerability, and it's the anti-isolation. There's definitely literature discussing the biggest mothership problem, to use, we spoke about a mothership belief. The mothership problem is loneliness and isolation. When I'm identifying with others and coming out of isolation, that's the ground floor. That's the space of healing.
Absolutely.
So I think that what I'm hearing in you is that I'm Zach Barr. I am trying to create an atmosphere that invites this discussion without shame.
It needs to be created. And the other thing that's interesting is, I run a support group in Los Angeles for music and music industry professionals. And that is something that has been really interesting for me to watch as both an artist and a clinician, because it's free and it ranges in professionals from, I work in a restaurant and I'm trying to get my career off the ground, to, I work with one of the biggest artists in the world. And so having a commonality between everybody is really powerful. And I see it with my own eyes that again, and this is sort of what happened to me very, very early on, and it's being confirmed over and over again, is that, again, the struggles are similar from where it doesn't matter where you are in your career. So that's been really interesting. But yes, bringing people out of their isolation, bringing people together to share this experience is very powerful.
So and there is no fancy therapy here. The need is community, a recognition and permission to be vulnerable and not be ashamed, to drop pride, and to have a safe space to communicate. This is hard. I'm scared. Don't judge me if I'm at allegedly, quote unquote, a higher level. This is so fucking hard, and I need to have an atmosphere where it's safe to share. And I think of my son saying to me, I'm a Jewish dad. I'm like, what are you doing? How are you gonna? I'm very invested and I'm curious about what's going on. He said this one time. He said, it feels like I'm walking off a cliff and I'm just trusting that there's a bridge there. There isn't, but I'm just pretending there's a bridge there to catch me.
And how hard must that be?
And I don't know if he gets to say that, if he gets to broadcast that in the same way. And I'm not saying that people should just go and purge this and spill this, but for someone to create an atmosphere of we get it. We get it. And here you go. We can help. So I want to hear now about what your efforts, because you spoke to me earlier about there's a lot of efforts and a lot of projects you have to help all types of musicians. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing on that front.
So I have my private practice here, where I see various different individuals and very different levels of artists. I run my support group. And then I am the clinical director of an organization called backline.care. So we just launched about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and we are an online hub for mental health and wellness services for the music business. So we are the first organization of its kind to bring all of the existing other organizations working in this space together in one online space. And then we provide individual case management for music industry professionals and their families around the country.
Okay, so let's make that digestible, right? That sounds so fancy, but that's a lot. But I want to make that digestible. So the first piece is you work with individuals in individual therapy, helping the struggling artists.
Individuals. I work with bands. I work with family members
That's
of artists.
That's a bucket list for me. I'd never done it. I've been around for a long time. I do want to mediate band conflict one time.
Yeah, I'll bring you in the next time.
I want a good fight with a band.
It's really interesting. It's if you've ever worked with a couple or a family, it's basically the exact same dynamic happening, but you have this creative sort of process happening in addition, which is fascinating.
Love it. So it's side note. So that's one part. You do a support group, but then there's this backline.care, right? And that's got my attention because that's generous. That is, I am providing a triage service. In essence, if you're struggling and you're a musician, right? In any way, shape, or form, a family member of a musician connected to the music industry, and some of the things we spoke about that you don't feel you have permission in a safe way to talk about the gravity of how these things are affecting you and your mental health.
Appropriate resources for those things.
Then there's what you've created and founded and co-founded, I should say, is an organization where your first call, right? Where your first call. And I'll brag for you because you did earlier. This just started, and already you've had over 80 inquiries, right? In month one, which makes sense to me. I think of it as a very pained group without permission to be fully open about their struggle, even though it looks like in many ways they are.
Sure. I mean, the inspiration for Backline came from a collective community recognizing the needs of this population, stemmed out of a few deaths within the music community. And then several of us, I have a great team who is working in tandem with me. We had a large call to action, and we had a lot of people on the phone from managers, agents, artists, mental health practitioners, both to identify the existing organizations out there and to identify the treatment gaps for this population.
So there have been enough tragic outcomes for big business in concert with big creativity to wake up and say enough. What
are we going to do
as a community
to help this population?
So walk me through what would the type of phone call you expect be for this organization?
Right. So backline.care has several missions. One, the primary clinical mission we have right now and the clinical program we have right now is the free case management program. But in addition to that, we have venue outreach. So we are getting our materials in venues all across the country, both in green rooms and also on tour buses to get our exposure out there. So we've done some activations at festivals already. We were at Austin City Limits. We've done some counseling at private concerts and benefit concerts as well. So it's a very robust program. But to answer your question, the typical call that we are getting is from a musician who is a working musician who is above the poverty line, but below the financial level to have a lot of disposable resources to be able to provide for their own mental health. So what we have done clinically, and I will say that every single person on our staff is a master's level or licensed, and has experience within the music business. So it's really important that everyone understand that Backline is not only an organization that was started by the music industry for the music industry, but almost every single person in our organization, both administratively and clinically, has extensive firsthand experience being in this industry.
So a sort of cultural competency within the industry. Okay.
Absolutely. So if you go to our website, we have a get help form. So the process works. If you are struggling wherever you are, you can go to the website.
Why don't you tell us what the website is?
So it's backline.care.
Okay. Backline.care.
Backline.care. And you go to the get help page. There is a form there that you can fill out that will come directly to one of the case managers. We then schedule an assessment call with you. We've built an internal assessment to help us recognize the need and to help recognize the services that we should refer to. So then we do the assessment phone call. And then we go into our Rolodex of both existing organizations, partnership programs that we have, and our list of individual therapists around the country. And we can then find you individual help based on your location, your acuity, and your sort of your financial need. And yeah.
So if you're a musician artist listening to this, right? My hope for you is you have the courage to make the call, because our prediction is it's more than very common to struggle in this very complicated universe of the artist. So how do we reach you individually? You as an individual as well. Do you have contact information? What is the best way to reach you?
So to reach me individually would be zackborer.com, ZACKBORER.com. That's my personal website for my private practice. There's information about me as well on the Backline website. So yeah, I'm sort of doing it all.
I'm going to throw out one more question.
Yeah.
Right? Quick response, right? Gut feeling. If you said, wow, I have really made a cultural shift, and you look back in 20 years and like, wow, this industry has really changed. What are 3 things you want to see in the culture change that just blows you away?
I think I want to see it come from the top down instead of I want to see it come from more people in power, whether that be an executive or musicians or
speak up musicians.
Not necessarily speak up musicians. I understand the sensitivity of talking about things like this, but I do think that the change agents in this business can be the younger executives who are coming up, who recognize that this is a problem and who want to make a financial investment and a societal investment to supporting their artists. I think that we can do a lot of legwork here, but I do think it has to go in tandem with those who can create change and the power players in the industry.
So top-down change, right, and recognition.
Sure.
Give me 2 more.
Compassion and sensitivity to this community.
From the public.
From the public.
Right. Okay.
From the public, I've heard somebody say that musicians are the individuals who create an environment for everyday people to go and have a stress relief. So, but what is the stress reliever, and how are we taking care of those individuals who are creating that space for them? So I think understanding, from the public perspective, understanding that this is a challenging lifestyle and having more compassion for them is really important.
Give me 1 more.
What was the question again?
What 3 things that you would want to see? Wow, the culture has really changed. So compassion from the public,
sure.
Sensitivity from the people in power. 1 more.
And more clinicians who understand this and who can be trained to work with this population.
See, you did a good job there.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
That was very, very illuminating. So appreciate it.
Thanks.
This podcast is for general information and entertainment purposes only. This should not be considered treatment advice, nor is it a substitute for an individual treatment plan. If you have questions or concerns about your individual situation, it is strongly recommended you consult a licensed professional to talk about things that are specific to you. If there is an emergency, it is strongly recommended you seek treatment at your nearest emergency room.